So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, in whichever part of world you are. It's great to be speaking on the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon, which is running across all over the world. Thanks to the organizers who have make it happen. So, let's go ahead. So let me introduce myself. I'm Anna Jhaveri. I'm based out of Ahmedabad, which is a city in west of India. I'm a tech lead, project delivery manager, and a managing partner for Soho Dragon. Soho Dragon is like a Microsoft Gold partner. We provide services for SharePoint, Microsoft 365, Power Platform, Teams, anything that is related to Microsoft 365 or SharePoint. I have worked with Microsoft products, especially with SharePoint, since over 12 years. I started my career working with SharePoint like MOS 2007 and WSS 3.0. Since then, I have been working with SharePoint, Office 365, which is now Microsoft 365, and also related technologies with SharePoint. Thank you to all sponsors due to whom this event is possible. So big thanks and big cheers for all the sponsors. So today's agenda. I'll give an introduction what incoming emails are for someone who hasn't worked with incoming emails on SharePoint on-premise. I'll give an introduction for incoming emails. Also, if you have any questions, any suggestions, or or want to give your introduction, just post it on the Q&A section. Then I'll explain you what business scenarios where you could use incoming emails. What is the difference between incoming emails implementation on SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint online? What are the alternatives to implement incoming emails in SharePoint Online? Then we'll do a deep dive on how to use Power Automate for implementing incoming emails for SharePoint Online. And then we'll do a demo. And then I'll also share some tips and tricks while you are developing Flow that can help you develop better Flow and that's right. So what are incoming emails? Now in SharePoint on-premise, Microsoft had it had a functionality called incoming emails settings in the central admin. So what it would do is it would take your SMTP settings, and then in a SharePoint library, you can enable that library to receive emails. But that setting is kind of missing in SharePoint Online. That is why I'm doing this session today on how you can accomplish incoming emails without even SharePoint Online providing the incoming emails settings as it exists in SharePoint on-premise. So when you do a migration from on-prem to online, you might come across a scenario that your customer who is currently on-prem wants to migrate to SharePoint Online might already be using incoming emails, and they might want to use it even they go after migrating to the cloud. So what would you do in those scenarios is where my session is going to help you. So some of the examples where you can use incoming emails. So for example, you are developing an app that sits over SharePoint, and your customer or your client receives some product orders or replacements on emails. Now there are some users who need to monitor these emails. So rather than using a shared email box to monitor these emails, you can put these emails in SharePoint for better tracking and attaching more information to the emails. So in that scenario, you can configure the emails to fall into SharePoint library, and then you can do further processing on the email, like a workflow attached to that email that this product order has been processed or this replacement has been processed, and also attach some metadata to the emails, which wouldn't be possible if the users are using shared inbox. So that's one of the scenarios. Now let's look at the next scenario. So for example, like we did for this for a customer on-prem. So this is a real scenario. Also, the product order was also a real scenario. So for example, if you're working for an enterprise client and then they have a lot of jobs running in their environment, and they could be any technology, like not just Microsoft, but if those jobs are running in the environment and IT wants to track that jobs, so what IT can do is the when the job completes, whether it's a success or a failure, it will send all the job status in an email, and then those emails fall into the SharePoint library, and then SharePoint library will process the emails and extract the information whether the job was failure or success, based on which dashboard can be built, which can be monitored by IT. That okay, so these are the jobs running in my environment, and these were the successes and these were the failures, and then IT can do further actions on the failed jobs. So this will give an holistic view on the dashboard through SharePoint to IT, rather than uh, it will give a centralized way for IT to monitor the statuses of the job. So one of the great examples to use email-enabled libraries in this scenario. And one of the most common scenario is like you don't have a support or a help desk system implemented, and if you're looking for a small solution to implement a help desk system over SharePoint, what you can do is make the library email enabled, and when user sends emails to help desk to get support, the emails would arrive in the library, and the help desk agents would monitor that library to see, okay, what emails have arrived from the users, and then also do tracking on that emails, like whether anyone is working on that support request, and whether that support request is resolved, is it waiting on the user. So a support help desk system can also be developed over SharePoint using email animal libraries. And last but not the least, any application that you are building over SharePoint, which requires use of emails, which still uses emails, you can use in email-enabled libraries to process the emails. So we looked into different examples of how incoming emails can be used. Now we will look into what are the differences between incoming emails implementation on-prem and SharePoint Online. All right, so when you're working on SharePoint on-prem and you want to implement incoming emails, as I mentioned, you do some central admin settings and then make the SharePoint library email enabled. Now, once email arrives in the library, you want to do further processing on that email, then you need to write an event receiver code and attach with that library to do whatever processing you want to do as per the code that you have written. But now this for SharePoint on-prem. We don't have email animal settings in SharePoint Online. Neither we have event receivers other than remote event receivers in SharePoint Online. So what will we do to implement email enable list or libraries on SharePoint Online? So I'll give you some alternatives on how you can implement that in SharePoint Online. All right, so one of the first option to use email enable libraries in SharePoint Online is to use Flow, and we will do a deep dive in that today. So you'll know how to design a flow in order to make a SharePoint library email enabled. What are the other options? You can use Azure Logic Apps, which is kind of similar to Flow, but it is more little technical. So developers can use Azure Logic Apps depending on what they are accustomed to use, like Flow or Azure Logic Apps. You can use any of that. Then you can, if you just don't want to use SharePoint and you want to just use a mailbox, then you can use a shared mailbox where user can access emails from their Outlook. Then you can use Teams or SharePoint Office 365 groups. Like Teams in channels in Teams have an email. So have your users send an email to the Teams channel. In that way, you can monitor the emails being sent. Or users can send email to an Office 365 group. So there is also another alternative of getting emails in your Teams. All right, so we'll do a deep dive on how to do incoming emails with Flow, but why are we doing it with Flow? So let's understand those reasons. So Flow is a no-code solution, so you are not dependent on technical team or developers to implement it. Then it really takes only like couple of hours for you to implement it. Like if you want to do some custom processing, then just give couple of hours and your flow will be ready. And if you don't want to do further processing, it just takes few minutes for you to implement the flow for incoming emails. So really good, saves your time of development. Now, Flow also allows you to do, once the email has arrived in SharePoint library, if you want to do further processing, you can add as many actions and logic in the flow to do further processing on emails, like send a message to a team member or assign metadata to that email, and a lot of possibilities are there in order to do further processing of the emails. One of the advantages of using Flow is that it can connect to various services, applications, and tools like ServiceNow or your CRM, Dynamics 365, or Dropbox. So and lot more others. So if your Flow needs to connect with other app services and tools, then it will easily help you to do that. Then Flow also provides templates, so you don't have to build anything from scratch. Even if you want to do it from scratch, then you have the option to do it from scratch, but there are so many templates available for you to save your time and get started with Flow. Then it is a simplified version of Azure Logic Apps. So if you're a business user or a power user, then Flow will make more sense to you. And if you're like a technical user or a developer, then you might be more comfortable with Azure Logic Apps. And one of the advantages of the Flow is if your Flow fails for a specific email, you can easily rerun it so that you don't miss that email. So that's really a good advantage. All right, then let's first do the demo, working demo of how emails arrive into a SharePoint library. We will also see some other logic that is put on the flow to make the emails arrive in the SharePoint library. Let's go to the demo. So I believe you must be able to see my screen with a SharePoint online environment open. Excuse me. All right. So I have a library here called email box, which will store the emails that are sent to a specific email address. And then I have another list, which is called folder assignment. So for example, how I have configured my flow is like if an email arrives from this email address, which is aj@sohodragon, then put this email under email box library under this folder path. So, excuse me. Excuse me. All right. So, so this helps, like, for example, if I have multiple libraries where I want to store emails, I want emails to go under specific folder based on the email metadata, then I can do that further processing by looking into the email properties and then redirecting emails to that specific folder or a library. So this is an example I have added to show the processing of the email and then redirecting emails to different locations. So let's do a demo and then I'll show you the flow on how it works. So let's send an email. So I'll put an email address here. So here, this is the email address on which I have enabled emails to fall into SharePoint library. Now let's call this subject M365 virtual conference day 1. Then let's do an attachment on this email. Let's attach a file. All right, and then let's put email body test email for the conference. All right, so let me send this email. Now what this will do, this will send an email to an email box, and then this will trigger a flow to run, and it will put the email under this email inbox library and under this folder path. Now let's go to our library here. It may take a while for the flow to run and the email to arrive. So here it is. So now what I have done, my flow to behave is create a folder based on the email subject, and then put the email file and also the attachment. So today you will also learn about how to extract attachments from that email and save to a SharePoint library. So I have used the email subject to name the folder and to name the file, and the attachment name is the name of the attachment file that user had put on the email. So let's just open this email. So this is our email. Now you've seen the working demo of how an email arrived into a SharePoint library along with its attachment. Now let's see how this happens behind the scenes from the flow. Till that, let me see if there are any questions. All right. I don't see any questions out there, but feel free to post any questions you have. I would be happy to answer. So here is my flow, which says when a new email arrives in user inbox. So in order to like receive emails from an inbox for a flow, you have to use this action when a new email arrives. This is an action trigger. I would say this is an trigger provided by Flow that whenever a new email arrives in an inbox, you can use this trigger. Now there are two types of triggers. One is when a new email arrives in a mailbox, or when a new email arrives in a shared mailbox. So you can alternatively use any of them. That if you have a shared inbox, if you want to monitor the emails of shared inbox, then use the shared inbox trigger, or if you want to monitor emails of a specific inbox, then use the when new email arrives in a mailbox. All right. So here this act trigger has a setting that what account does this use. Now, as I'm not using a shared when a new email arrives in a shared inbox, that is why I'm using a specific inbox and provided the credentials of that specific inbox for the demo purpose. Now, Flow also provides me an option like what folders I want to track, I want to monitor for emails to arrive. So I have chosen the inbox folder, but you can choose whatever folder applies in your scenario. Now, once the email has arrived, we need to process that email and put that email in SharePoint. All right. Before that, I have initialized some variables for further processing of my emails. First is I'm getting the subject of the email. I'll get the subject of the email. Then I need to know like in which document library would the email land in. So that is why I have a document library variable. Then a folder path, like under which folder the email should arrive in, and what is the attachment file name in order to save attachments. All right, so I have this scope action here. I'll further go into why I used scope action here. Now, this is the main logic of my flow. Here I have used an HTTP action, and I have why I'm using an HTTP action. Let me explain you a little about that. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the subject of that email and using the subject of the email as a folder name and as a file name to save that email in SharePoint. Now SharePoint, if the subject name has some special characters, then SharePoint may not uh, allow me to create the file with that subject name or create a folder with that subject name because it has some special characters which are not allowed in SharePoint while creating file or a folder. So if I want to strip off all the special characters from the subject name and then use that subject name in order to create a folder and a file in SharePoint. Now, I have created another flow which contains the logic to remove the special characters from a string, from a text. So why I have created a different flow is I wanted to explain reusability in the flow by creating a child flow which will just remove the special characters from a text and then return the text which has no special characters in that. So I wanted to demonstrate like the same way developers do in the code. They create a function to remove the special characters and return the string back. In same way, I'm doing that with flow. So this shows that we are able to reuse the logic. Now, if I create another flow which requires the same logic to remove the special characters from a string and return that string back to the flow, then I don't have to rewrite that logic. I just need to call that child flow and my work is done. So this explains reusability of the logic in your flow. Now, as you build flow, the flow will start to grow a lot. Now, flow also has limitations. Like if you add too many, like 250, 300 actions, then you might reach the limits of the flow. So that is why if you use reusability in your flow, that will help you to minimize the size of the flow, and also like build common logic for your flow so that you can use it elsewhere in other flows also. So let me show you that another child flow which is used to remove the special characters from a text. So here is that child flow. Now here I have used an HTTP when HTTP request is received. So when a HTTP request is received in this flow, the flow will trigger. Then it will take subject name as a string or subject as a input parameter. Then it will create an array of the special characters that we want to remove from the string. So I have created an array with the characters I want to strip off from the input string. And then I have applied a for each loop to go through all the characters of the subject. And if I see that, okay, this is a special character, then strip it out. So once I have a string processed with or a text processed with the special characters removed from that text, then I have to return that new text which does not have any special characters back to the parent flow. So that's where I'm using this respond to Power App or flow action, and then I'm returning back the updated subject or updated string. So this shows that, okay, I have 5 flows which have requirement to remove the special characters from a string. I have one reusable child flow developed which can be used in those 5 flows. So I don't have to repeat my logic in each of the flows. So this is a very good example, like though it's a small example, but will give you insights on how to do reusability in your flow. So that is the tip number 1. So if you want to like do reusable flows, reusable logic in the flows, then create a child flow, put that reusable logic in that flow, use HTTP action to call that flow, and use the response to Power App or flow in order to return whatever data you want to return to the parent flow. All right, I hope that makes sense, and let us see if there are any questions. Yes, I do have a blog out there, so I'll give you a link on how to do it. There is a link after in the end of my session. That's a question from Craig, and other questions I'll look up at the end of the session. All right, so this is a good example of doing reusability in the flow. Now let's get back to our parent flow. So here I'm calling a child flow, giving the subject as my input. Now here I have received the response from the child flow, and using the parse JSON action to like extract the return value from my child flow. So I'm extracting the value of the updated subject and assigning to a subject variable. Okay, so now at this point, we have a subject which has stripped out special characters from the subject name. Now what I want to do, as I showed you in my demo earlier, that I have a list which is called folder assignments, where which has an email. Based on this email, the flow will determine like in which library and a folder the email will be copied to. So so I'm querying this list to know like this email has arrived now. Where do I need to put this email? So I'm using get items action of flow, and then I'm putting the site. I'll put the site address here and the list name. And here I'm putting a filter query that says where email is equal to from email, the from email from which this initial email arrived. So I sent an email from AJet's Dragon email address. So what this will do is it will go to this folder assignment list. It will query an item where the email address is AJet because that is the email from where I sent this send the email which arrived into this flow. All right, then after querying the SharePoint list, I need to extract the value of the item returned by SharePoint list. So I'm taking the folder path, this folder path where I need to copy the email, and the document library name under which I need to copy the email. All right, so now we have two things done. One is we have an email subject with stripped off special characters. We have also queried SharePoint list in our flow in order to determine when we need to put the email in the SharePoint. So you've seen two examples here. One is how to query SharePoint list using flows, and how to do reusable common logic in the flows. So you've learned two things right now. All right, so next thing, now if you see in my example which I showed you, what the flow did is it copied the email to email box SharePoint library under this folder path, and it created a new folder for the email that I sent, and then it copied the email and the attachment. So here I'll be creating a new folder with the subject name. So I'm using a create folder action of flow, and then I'm specifying the document library name and the new folder path, the name of the folder which I want to create the folder with, and the path under where the folder should be created in that document library. So I'm providing those parameters to create new folder action in the flow. This will create this M365 virtual conference test1 folder in my document library, specified document library, and under specified folder path. All right, so now our folder is created. Now we want to save the email file and the attachments. So I'm using a create file action of flow, where it takes the SharePoint site URL, then it takes the folder path, okay, where the file needs to be created. So I'm concatenating the document library and the new folder path where we have created the new folder here. So I'm concatenating a string with this whole path in order to provide to this create file action. And then this I'm providing the file content body, which is provided by the trigger, which is when new email arrives. Here is the email body. So this will create an email file in SharePoint for me. And please note that you need to provide .eml or .msg extension when you create an email file in SharePoint here. So I'm providing subject name as the name of the email and extension as EML as it's an email file. All right, so what this will do is this will create an email file for this email that has arrived in SharePoint library under a specific library and a specific folder path. All right, now we've seen the reusability of common logic in flows. We have created new folder, and we have queried like SharePoint list to determine the folder path, and then we've also created the email file in SharePoint. Now we want to save the attachments, which, if there are any, in the email to SharePoint library, the same location where we created the folder and copied the email file. So we will use this get attachment action provided by flow. I'll provide the message ID, which is from the trigger, which is when new email arrives, and then the attachment ID. Now, if you see, I'm doing it in a loop. Why? Because there could be one or more attachment in the email. So that is why I have a loop here, and then I'll go through each attachment. This get attachment will go through each attachment, as you can see here, as the apply to each attachment. And then I'll again use create file action to save the attachment file to the SharePoint library. In same way, I'll provide the folder path, the file name of the attachment, and the contents of the file attachment. So as simple as that, we used the reusability of, again repeating, reusability of common logic across the flows. Then we queried SharePoint list in order to determine where in which library and the folder we want to copy the emails. And then we created a new folder under the library folder path, so that we can save our new email file and its attachments. And then we copied the email file, and then we also copied the attachments under that new folder. Excuse me. All right, so this is how we can do incoming emails in SharePoint, in a SharePoint online environment, as we don't have incoming email settings. So this scenario is really useful when you are doing migration from on-prem to online, where your customer is already using incoming emails in their on-prem environment. So we've encountered this scenario like twice in 2 different migrations, and that is why I saw a need that this scenario might be encountered by other people. So that is why I chose to demo this scenario in my session. All right. So now there is a question that I have used this 2 scope actions here. Now, what are the scope actions? Why I have used it here? Now, for example, let's say some error occurs in my flow. So what would happen if an error occurs in the flow? I want to handle that error in same way as developers do in their code, like try, catch, and finally. I also wanted to do something like similar, and I also wanted to get notified immediately when error occurs in the flow, so that I can act upon that error before the user reports it, right? So isn't it great to fix the error before it is reported by the user? All right, so that is why I have used a scope action provided by provided by flow. So my all the main logic of the flow resides in the main scope here. And then if there is any failure, then the logic to handle the failure, I have put in this scope fail or timeout. So for example, if there is an error occur in calling another flow, or error occurred to query the SharePoint list, or error occurred while creating new folders or saving the files in SharePoint, if any of those error occurs, then what my flow will do, it will go to this another scope action, which is called scope fail or timeout, and process this logic. Now this logic is to extract the email error and send the email that, okay, this error has occurred in your flow. So this is a very good example of doing error handling in the flow, and this is one of the best practices to do it, like so that you get notified when your flow fails and you can act upon it. So how this flow can determine that when an error occurs, it needs to go here. So here in the main scope, I have an option here. Let me show you. There is an option called configure run after. Sorry, I need to show configure run after here. All right, so here I'm in the scope fail or timeout. I'm specifying that run this action if the main has failed, skipped, or timeout. So this is how, if this main section has failed, skipped, or timeout, this section will run. So this is the configuration that you need to do in your flow, like to add two scopes, and on the failed scope, like the second scope where you have the fail logic, do the configure run after settings that when the main flow logic has failed, skipped, or timeout, then this section of this part of section of your flow will run. So, and this is a very standard process of extracting errors from the flow. So I'll not go in more into detail on this, but it's on my blog, and I have also taken a reference from another blog. So I'll provide the link of that blog on how I extracted this errors, but you can get it from the link. So what this does is it will take the result of the flow failure, and then after extracting the error details, it will send me an email that your flow has failed with the link of the failed flow. So let's do a demo on a failed flow so that you get an real-time example of how this works. So what I'll do is I'll send an email to my flow from an email address which is not listed here. All right, so let me send an email from here, and then this, and failure test. All right, I'll see, put the same in the body. Let me send this email. Now this email address is not listed here. So what will happen in my flow is that my flow will not find under which folder the email needs to be copied, and this will make my flow to fail because I have not handled that. If I don't get an folder and a library path from this folder assignments SharePoint list, then what my flow should do, I have not handled that. So this will make my flow to error out, and we'll see the failure scenario. Okay, so I have sent the email. Now let's go to the flow. Here is the flow, and here is the run history. It will take a while for the flow to trigger. All right, let's wait for the flow to trigger, and let me complete this. So when the flow trigger will come back in 5 minutes to see the failure of the flow. All right, we have this here. So if you see here, this is the trigger which monitors the email. So here, if you see, this is the email that I just sent, Microsoft 365 virtual conference failure test. Then it did this initialization, then it came in this main flow. It called another flow with the subject name. Then I extracted the subject name by removing special characters. Then I queried the SharePoint list, which is called folder assignments, and I didn't get any return value because I sent an email from an email address which does not exist in this list, and that made my flow to fail because I don't have a new folder path where I don't have a library path where my flow needs to be copied to. All right. So that is why my flow failed here. So you can see the red action here, and here the other actions are not being executed because the flow has resulted into an error while creating new folder because my flow did not know where the new folder needs to be created, in which library, because the library name was not written by this list, as the email address from which I sent an email is not listed here. So my flow went ahead and executed this section. Now here the flow extracted the error details, and it sent an email to my email that there was an issue with creating folders. Now let's go to my inbox and see if I have received the email. It must be sitting in my junk. All right, see here. This is the flow failure email I have received. So it says there was an issue with the flow, and I can copy this link and it will take me to the same run history of my flow. So I can be on top of errors that are occurring in my flow by using this technique. Before the users report it, I can go and fix my flow. Now, for example, I can add new. Now let's do something here, like I'll add an item here. I'll create this folder. All right, so I've added a new folder assignments here. If an email is received from this email address, then it should go under this library under this folder. Now let's rerun this flow that had failed. Now, so this is the beauty of the flow. Now my flow has received an email and it has failed, but I want my flow to rerun again so that I don't miss that email. So in that case, I just have to resubmit and click OK, and the flow will do its thing. And now this time the flow will not fail and put the email under the specified folder. Now, do you see here the flow hasn't failed, and we must have a new email here. See, so this is how simple it is to implement incoming emails in your flow. So I'm running out of time. Let's get back to our presentation. All right, where were we? Okay, so in the flow, the triggers and the actions that we use are called connectors. It can help you to connect to Outlook, OneDrive, or any tools and services. Connector is like a technically wrapper around an API in technical terms. There are three types of connectors, which are called standard, premium, and custom connectors. Standard is included in your like Office 365 license, E3 if you have, and other licenses I'm not sure of. The premium connectors like HTTP action. One thing to note here, I am calling another flow using HTTP action. and that is a premium connector. So you'll need a license in order to use the reusable logic of using the premium connectors. So HTTP is a premium connector. So mind well, when you design your flows, you need to make sure you have a license to use premium connectors in order to use reusable flows in your flow environment. Then there are two sets of connectors. One is triggers and one is actions. Triggers is like when an email arrives in your inbox is called trigger. Actions like create a file, create a folder, or get items from SharePoint, or do an HTTP action like that. All right, so what are triggers? Like triggers are like which kicks off your workflow, like a polling trigger. There are two types of trigger. One is polling trigger and one is push trigger. Polling trigger will frequently check whether data has arrived. Or push trigger is like when manually user pushes the trigger from from SharePoint, for example. If I push a trigger to run the flow, which is like a manual push trigger. And actions are like what flow does, as we saw many actions in this demo today, like query SharePoint or get items from SharePoint or create files, create folders. All right, so what to use in flow to track emails, that we saw in demo, just a revision, that use the triggers like when new email arrives or when new email arrives in shared inbox. I used action like export email in order to get the email content. Then I used create file in SharePoint on OneDrive based on where you want to create an email file. I used get attachment action to get the attachment contents of the emails. Then few tips while you're developing the flow. One is name the actions appropriately. Otherwise, for what happens, like after 6 months, you revisit your flow and you might not remember what you configured in the flow. So it is very important to name your actions in the flow with a limited use of characters, because it has a 80 character limit. So you have 80 characters to describe like what that action does, for you to remember later on what your flow does. Then to implement, for example, if you want to implement two triggers in the workflow, so you have a common flow logic, but you want two triggers for that flow. In that case, you can't have two triggers for a flow by default while developing the flows. But what you can do is develop a common reusable flow, and then all the common logic will reside in that flow. And then you can have two other flows which will just call that reusable flow. And those two flows will have common, like two triggers, like two different flows with two triggers calling one same reusable child flow, which will have the reusable logic. So I showed you reusability today to share logic across flow, create one processing child flow, and create two flows with two triggers, and then call the third processing flow, which has the common logic using HTTP action. Mindwell is a premium connector, so you'll need the license to use it. One is we saw how to do error handling. So that is one good example of like tips when you are developing the flow. Do error handling so you are on top of the errors which are occurring in your flow. And one of the key things when you are using passwords like connection accounts in your flow, like the one I used for email, for the email. So you need to keep your connection password updated. If password has changed on that account, then you need to go and fix the flow with the updated password. So test your flow as you build it, because if you big flow and then you test it, then you might run into issues if it does not work. So develop a little, test it, develop a little, and test it. All right. So shortcomings of this solution, like one shortcoming I came across is when a new email arrives in shared inbox, just didn't work for me. That could be because that shared inbox was previously a user inbox and it was converted into shared inbox, and it was like giving me out errors. So sometimes you may end up like uh, errors in using this trigger. And then as I was not using shared inbox, I was using a user inbox. So I was using a connection in my trigger, which is when new email arrives. So I had to use a password. So keep your password updated, otherwise your flow will fail. So I have references, like I have written detailed blog post on this implementation. So you can visit my blog and you can note down the links, or you can visit my blog jhaveri.com. You will find this blog post very easily. And I took some references from another blog post also. So putting those blog post links here, like how to implement error handling, I took references from another blogs. So that is why putting the references here. And like it's a Microsoft conference, you can't have a conference without prizes, like, right? So visit the vendor booth sessions and watch videos to win prizes, win exciting prizes. And then the sponsors have donated 10% of their funds to the support community relief, as the world is going haywire at this time. So I hope everyone stays healthy and safe. And if you feel like donating, you can go and donate to that link. And mark your calendars for SharePoint conference and Microsoft 365 conference next year. I hope things settle down by then, and see you at the conference. All right, I'll see if there are any questions there I need to address. All right, sorry, there are a lot of questions. I'll try to answer, and I'll also post my there. So let's see. Craig has a. So there is a question from Craig which says, same folder if same subject line, or created a new folder. So I can put further, I didn't put further logic in my flow that if same subject emails arrive in the same folders, what to do. But you can put further logic in your flow to handle that scenario. So I have a blog out there, as I showed you the links to do all the step-by-step processes of incoming email. So you are sorted there, Craig. So scenarios which are not possible, I'm not too sure. Like it depends on what you want to implement. So Flow has a lot of things you can build your logic around. So I don't see any not possible scenarios as of now, but you have to use like emails from a shared inbox or emails from a user inbox. And if you're using user inbox, then you have to use a username and a password. So keep an eye that you are keeping the password updated in that connection. So I shared two shortcomings of this implementation. So will there be a flow download of some kind? Had this flow defined so that we can import? I'll see if I can export this flow and put it on my blog. I think I'm running out of time, Joel. Please interrupt if I am, but I can.
You got a couple more minutes.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Then I'll go through the questions. I'll see if I can export this flows and put it on my blog for everyone to access it. Why did you call another child flow for the subject? So why I call child flow for the subject is to show the reusability, like why we are using, how we can do reusability in the flow. So as you develop flows, that flow might tend to become larger and larger with a lot of logic that you put in. So you may also want to make sure that you are building like smaller flows so that it is easy to maintain, and you don't reach the limits like after an year while maintaining the flow. And also when you put usable logic across flow, like same logic in the flows in different flows. Like for example, if I had a special character replacement requirement for different flows, then I just have to use one flow which has the logic stored in it. So I don't have to rewrite that logic in different flows. That is the reason why I called a child flow, in order to show how you can do reusability in the flows. Yes, I used Craig. I used the premium connectors, which is HTTP, in order to call another flow. And then in the another flow, when I used an action called, I used a trigger when an HTTP request is received. This trigger is in premium connector, and here in where I'm calling the HTTP flow, action, this is also an premium connector. So yes, I'm using a premium connector. So in order to implement reusability, you will need premium connectors. For without premium connectors, I'm not sure, but if I come across any such option, I'll put it on my blog post. All right, let me go back to the resources slide for you to capture the references. You can capture the screenshot of this. All right, so I think I'm complete with my sessions. If there are any more questions, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or my email. Happy to help and happy to help the community here. Thank you.